Hey everyone, I'm Amanda Pitts, Senior Photographer at Grand Valley State University, and I'm also your Corporate Relations Chair on the UPAA board. I'm very excited to introduce Cristina Mittermier today, whom I admire, and I've been following her on Instagram for quite some time. I'm always excited to see her newest posts pop up in my feed. Her photography is beautiful, inspiring, and brings the viewers of her work closer to more fantastic animals and gorgeous places than most of us will get to experience in our lifetimes. And now that I'm done kind of gushing about Cristina, I'll read you a little bit of her bio. Cristina is the marine biologist and activist who pioneered the concept and field of conservation photography. She founded the International League of Conservation Photographers in 2005 to provide a platform for photographers working on environmental issues. In 2014, Mittermier co-founded Sea Legacy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of the ocean. In 2020, on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, she announced the most ambitious project of her career, Only One, a new digital technology product that amplifies stories, campaigns, and solutions that sit at the intersection of ocean health and social justice and uses the power of media and technology to inspire individuals to take action to rebuild ocean life. Mittermier is a Sony Artisan of Imagery and was named one of National Geographic's Adventurers of the Year in 2018. She's also the recipient of many awards, including the Mission Award from the North American Nature Photography Association, the Smithsonian Conservation Photographer of the Year Award, and the Imaging Award for Photographers Who Give Back. In recognition of her 3 decades of courageous journalism and making the pictures that tell the story of our planet, Mittermier received the 2021 Seattle Aquarium Sylvia Earle Medal. I think Cristina best described her work and her mission perfectly when she said, "Images can help us understand the urgency many photographers feel to protect wild places. My work is about building a greater awareness of the responsibility of what it means to be human. It is about understanding that the history of every living thing that has ever existed on this planet also lives within us. It is about the ethical imperative, the urgent reminder that we are linked to all other species on this planet, and that we have a duty to act as the keepers of our fellow life forms." And without further ado, Cristina.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I am exhausted hearing about myself. I don't remember ever a time in my life when I didn't care about what was happening to Earth. As a young person, I remember reading a book by Paul Ehrlich on the population bomb. I don't know if some of you might remember that book, and it had an enormous impression on me. And at the time, Ehrlich thought that the population of the planet was going to meet its demise because of hunger. We didn't die of hunger. We came up with a green revolution and ways to produce more food that we can eat. But at that time, nobody was talking about climate change. And I remember the first time I heard about climate change, just feeling so overwhelmed. And the thing that was most terrifying to me was the fact that people around me didn't seem to have the same concern. The same can be said for the ocean. I went to university in Mexico to study marine biology and fisheries biology. And when the first time I was confronted with the way that we capture species from the ocean, I was horrified. I understand that all of your photographers, I have been told that you guys are Swiss Army knives of your craft, which is a great way to be, right? I mean, to be able to grab a camera and explore our planet through our lens, I think it's a gift. And I've tried to do that. I'm going to share my screen. I'm incredibly humbled to be here with all of you. I always get most nervous when I talk to other photographers because you guys are very critical. So when I graduated from university, I knew that I didn't want to be part of fisheries. I didn't want to be part of the industry that I thought was destroying the ocean. I wanted to do something else. So I went to work for conservation, and I started working for Conservation International in Mexico. And just, the way that your journey takes you through these twists and turns and you never know where you're going to end. I ended up marrying a gentleman named Ross Mittermier, who was the president of Conservation International. And it felt like all my ambitions for, having an impact on saving our planet's valuable natural resources, all of a sudden were met with the opportunity to work for a very large conservation organization and to be married to somebody who had a lot of influence in there. And from Ross Mittermier, I learned a lot about the science of conservation, but I also learned a lot about what I call eco diplomacy, you know, the ability to translate science for policymakers, for the people that make decisions. And one of the great things that happened is that I had the opportunity to travel around the world. Ross, as president of the organization, as an anthropologist, was very interested in indigenous communities. And even as a very young, you know, mother, because I have 3 children, I was able to accompany him on many of these trips. So my first foray into photography was really through you know, trying to document the lives of indigenous people who I felt at the time were the most connected to Earth's natural ecosystems. To me, it seemed like they were the last people on this planet that still had some connection to the operating system of how our planet works. And they were also the most vulnerable, because when we lose biodiversity, when species go extinct, when development faces communities that are remote and on the fringe, they go from having very little and needing very little to having nothing, and to becoming some of the poorest members of society. And you know, when I started my photography career, some of you might recognize this. You know, I had no idea what I was doing. You know, when people said things like, you're going to have a body of work and you have to find a style, you know, I didn't understand what that meant. I think it takes about 20 years before you actually can look back at a collection of images and start to see a thread. And so for many, many years, I couldn't articulate what I was doing. I was just studying the work of other photographers, people that I admired. I still do, you know, and I always think about it as almost as a detective story. I look at something that Art Wolf photographs, you know, and I'll try to work backwards, you know, how he got that image. I still do that. What I wanted to do with my photographs of indigenous people was to make them tell stories that connected people to nature. This image, for example, is of an elder from an Inuit community when he was a little boy, when he was 4 years old. His community was bulldozered. Everybody in his village was taken by airplane several thousand miles north and just left there because the Canadian government wanted to populate the north so that the Russians wouldn't get access to that land. All of a sudden, these people have, I mean, no village, no tools, no way of surviving, and they had to walk. He was telling me the story, several months to get back to an ecosystem where they could survive. So many of them died. The atrocities that indigenous people have suffered because of colonialism are horrible. But I have always felt really compelled to tell a story that's more hopeful and more forward-looking. So I try to photograph indigenous people in a way that returns some of the dignity and the power to their story, because they're the only ones who can tell that story. As I was learning how to be a photographer, the thing that motivated me was the need that I saw in Conservation International for images. They needed photographs to help tell their story. And so I went to work for CI as the director of visual communications. And I convinced them that scientists taking pictures with their point and shoot cameras were not really telling a compelling story of our planet, and that they needed to invest in sending professional photographers. And as I was starting to make headway with this, I also started meeting photographers. I started going to the NAMPA meetings, the North American Nature Photographers Association meeting. And I'm talking to you, this is sometime, I don't know, around the 1990s. And I remember sitting in those meetings, and it was really awkward because you had amazing photographers that were doing incredible work with wildlife. And here I was with my little portfolio of indigenous people, you know, that didn't really fit into what NAMPA was trying to promote, which was wildlife photography. So I would raise my hand and I would say, could we consider, you know, all they wanted to talk was filters and lenses and the latest, you know, game farm. I wanted to ask them, can we use our photographs to try to protect some of the places where we photographed? And I was told in no uncertain terms that that was of no interest. You know, the organization didn't want to be associated with environmentalism because it was seen as a very polarizing thing, if you can even believe that. So I decided to form my own group, and that's how the International League of Conservation Photographers was born. NAMPA asked me to chair a group of, they were called the international photographers. And the only reason they were international, they were all American, is because they shot outside of the United States. And these were the people that were most interested in conservation, people like Nick Nichols, who was photographing in Gabon and in Cameroon, people like Franz Lanting photographing in Madagascar. And they had this craving to do more with their work. They really wanted their images to have a bigger impact than just being, on a magazine like National Geographic. So we convened a meeting in Anchorage, Alaska. And at this point, I'm a mom. I have like little kids, and I'm making these phone calls from a soccer field while I watch my kids play. I'm calling people like Gary Brash and trying to convince them to come to Anchorage to this meeting. And of course, I've never organized anything like this in my whole life. The World Wilderness Congress, which takes place every 4 years, offered me a basement conference room where I could have this meeting. And I organized it with duct tape and, and good wishes. But on the day that the meeting opened in Anchorage, there were, my favorite photographers sitting in the front row, David Dubélé and Flip Nicklin and, Connie Brandsilver, people that were really doing beautiful work. And they were waiting for me to tell them how we were going to use photography for conservation. So I had this idea that the International League of Conservation Photographers would be a common platform that, first of all, defined the intention, the purpose behind the images. It's not just about publishing a photograph. Nick Nichols said it at that meeting. He said, the work begins after you trip the shutter, and then you have to take those images to the president or the minister and show them. And you don't rest until a marine protected area or a national park is created. And that's what those photographers were doing. The ILCP is probably one of the things that I will remember on my deathbed as a proud idea, because it was not about me. It was about offering a definition with the purpose behind it so that an entire generation of photographers would call themselves conservation photographers. And I think we're there. When I talk to photographers around the world and they define themselves as conservation photographers, I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. They're not just nature photographers, they have this bigger purpose. So ILCP was something, hold on a second, I'm gonna go back. ILCP was something that really motivated me greatly to explore my own photography, because at the time I was a mom, I was raising kids, and I was really not focused on my own work. So, it's the turmoils in your life that guide you through these doors, and it is the courage that it takes to go through a new door that defines who you become next. ILCP was going great, but my personal life was a mess. I was getting a divorce, and I remember my divorce counselor saying to me, you cannot do both things at the same time. This is after about 7 years of ILCP. We had just raised our first $1 million. Everything was going great. We had these expeditions, we called them rapid assessment visual expeditions, where I assembled teams of photographers to go and photograph things and galvanize action around. Everything was going great, except, my life was falling apart. And my divorce counselor said to me, you cannot do both. You have to make a decision if you're going to run this organization or lead your family through this period in your life. And so I left. I left the ILCP, and I remember spending about a year when I was really lost and really thinking, that was it. And I was a divorced woman with small children and a very incipient career that was not very inspiring at all. But at the same time, I was already starting to make inroads on National Geographic, which was just 3 blocks from my apartment. So I started, attending more meetings and meeting more of the editors. And that's when I met Paul Nicklin. And Paul was on assignment. He was a member of the ILCP. We knew each other from a lot of correspondence, but we had never worked together, and he needed an assistant. And so I became Paul Nicklin's assistant. And not only am I his wife now, we eventually got married, but he was also the first person who put an underwater camera in my hands. And it felt like that journey that started with my passion for the ocean and wanting to be a marine biologist, after all these years, 25 years later, through underwater photography, became a very different journey. And Paul and I spent 10 years working for National Geographic on any number of assignments. A lot of them had to do with conservation issues. We photographed manatees and the issues surrounding freshwater habitat loss in Florida. We went and photographed indigenous cultures in Hawaii. We photographed climate change in the Arctic. And you must imagine, you know, what it feels like to be at National Geographic. You think this is the pinnacle. You have reached Everest. This is it. And it didn't feel like it was enough. It felt so empty that you would work for a year or two on a story for a magazine. It would find its way to the pages of the magazine 1 month and be gone the next month. And I didn't feel like that was making enough impact either. So I'm just going to show you a few photographs while I talk about this journey. And if you have any questions about them later, we can always go back. But it was when Paul and I were photographing a story. It was called The Blob, and it had to do with a very large body of warm water that had formed in the Pacific. It was about 1,000 miles long and 100 feet deep. And in some places, the water was 7 degrees warmer than it was supposed to be. And what we were left photographing were the dead animals that were suffering because the fish had gone deep where the water was cooler and there was no food available for whales or sea lions. So we were photographing a lot of dead animals. But this warm water had also become a broth for toxic chemicals. So the chemistry of the ocean was changing and toxic algae were developing. There were 3 different types of toxic algae, and animals that ate this algae would become paralyzed and drown. One day we photographed 30 sea otters that had washed up on shore, and they had paralytic poisoning and they were dying. And it was just so devastating. And I remember saying to Paul, we have to do more. And he said, well, let's start a nonprofit organization. And after 7 years running the ILCP, I said to him, I just don't think I have it in me to raise all this money and to build the infrastructure of nonprofit. Is so much work. But, he was determined that we could do more with our stories. And so we did. We left National Geographic officially in 2017. Sea Legacy started in 2016. And at the time, we had no idea what we were going to do. All I knew is that we could tell more emotional stories in our own voice without the constraints of an editor telling you how to tell those stories. At National Geographic, there's a mantra. The editors don't want photographers to be part of the story. They ask you to be a fly on the wall. They want you to be invisible. But I kind of knew that if you tell people about a photograph, what they really want to know is what it felt like to be there, what it's like to be underwater, with a leopard seal in Antarctica. People want to connect to the human emotions of fear and happiness and, the things that we share as humans. And so I thought, that through photography, we could open a bigger door for this very important conversation. Because back when I was a scientist, I realized that most people don't speak scientific lingo. And most, people don't want to feel stupid when you talk to them about names and numbers and things that they don't understand. So they reject the conversation. When you show people a photograph and they start asking questions, it's all of a sudden an opportunity to open a dialogue that was not there before. And so Paul and I started posting on our social media and telling these personal stories of what it's like to free dive 40 feet, to be with a mother and her calf as they sleep, these beautiful sperm whales off of Dominica, or what it's like to spend time in the Arctic with polar bears. People want to know if they really are as dangerous as they are. You have an opportunity to tell a whole different layer of stories. So at the beginning of Sea Legacy, it was just us posting on social media, and something amazing happened. We started getting a lot of followers. This is a little video that I want to show you, and I don't know if it's going to stream right, Amanda, so I'm going to play it. And if it doesn't show correctly, I can send it to you. I'm going to send you this whole presentation so that you can edit it appropriately. I'm going to hit play and we'll see if it plays.
The ocean is like a kaleidoscope. It's always moving with color and gesture and light. And it's never the same twice. It's always different.
It has the highest biodensity of life on Earth, way more than any terrestrial habitat.
There is an entire new, dark, complicated world, and this world is the engine of our planet.
Our own existence depends on a healthy ocean. Every other breath that a human being takes comes from the sea.
Without the ocean, our planet wouldn't survive. It wouldn't function. It wouldn't run.
When I began, I just wanted to make pretty pictures, beautiful images. But along the way, there was somewhat of an evolution. I began to see a lot of problems occurring in the world's oceans, things that may not have been evident to most people.
For most people, the experience of the ocean is from the beach, where it looks beautiful and it looks perfect.
But there's a thin blue line that separates what we perceive and what we see from what the reality is.
Once you go below this very thin molecular curtain of the surface, everything changes.
In the last 50 or 60 years, we've lost 90% of the big fish in the ocean.
For every swordfish pulled out of the North Atlantic, 10 to 12 blue sharks come with it. Day after day, week after week, year after year.
We've lost half the coral reefs in this planet. Think about that. Half the coral reefs are gone.
We have lost ice in the Arctic. We've lost ice shelves in Antarctica. And when you see all this life and how it is connected to ice, you realize that we will lose all levels of this ecosystem.
As a photojournalist, I sort of felt a sense of responsibility and a sense of urgency to begin turning my lens towards those things. I wanted it to be more like war photography.
If we're ever going to change people's behaviors, if we're ever going to be able to change people's perceptions, that's only going to start with an emotional connection. And that's going to happen through photography.
The idea to use photography to rally for conservation is not a new idea. It was born in the 1800s when photographers went out to Yellowstone and brought back images to Washington, D.C., and that gave birth to the first national parks. Photography has that kind of power.
Images coming from the ocean are barely 70 years old, and yet it's most of our planet.
15% of the terrestrial portion of the planet has been protected. Less than 2% of the ocean has the same level of protections.
You have to have these replenishment zones. The ocean can heal itself with protection if we just do that little bit. Give it a little protection. It's an investment in everybody's future.
All of these pictures have more power than scientists or voices or anything else to open the world's eyes to the sea. Vision is what drives humans.
It's the power of this visual communication that's at the core of Sea Legacy. We want to send photographers out there to the farthest reaches of the oceans where the story is being told. And we want to bring back stories of hope and messages for how this can be done.
We still have 50% of the coral reefs. We still have 10% of the sharks left. It's not good, but it's not over. I would hope that the work that we create will compel people to do something about this.
We have a small window of opportunity to act, and the solutions are simple. We know what we need to do.
We need to show everybody what's at stake. We need to rally soldiers of support. We just need the visual assets to do it.
The hope is that our images, that the storytelling can help ignite.
To convince the unconvinced.
It's the first step in the process of change. So that was kind of how we were thinking about Sea Legacy in the beginning, just tell stories, just show what's happening. And something amazing happened. People started following us on Instagram. And they started commenting and sharing. And before we knew it, we had something like 10 million followers. It was kind of like a scene out of that Forrest Gump movie where he starts running across the country and then he looks back and people are following. And we knew that we were striking an important chord with people that want to do something but have no opportunity to act, to be part of the conversation. And it all kind of crystallized when we opened a gallery in New York City. And it was the first time I don't remember, it was a couple of years ago when Instagram stories just first came out. And Paul grabbed his phone and he just did a little story and said, hey, we're opening a gallery, come on down. And 3,000 people showed up. We didn't know that most of our followers are in New York City. And those people, they were not there to buy fine art photography. They were there because they wanted to hear that there's hope, that there's something that can be done to protect and save our planet. So the idea that we had with Sea Legacy is that you go on these pioneering expeditions and really truly inspired by Jacques Cousteau and the Calypso, out there kind of galvanizing attention on an issue. You bring back the beautiful photographs because it actually takes a lot of visual material to feed this hungry animal called social media. But then we could do these global campaigns, and the idea was that we wanted to generate support and funds, and we wanted to propel sustainable solutions, and then tell people how the story ended. That was kind of like this beautiful circle that if you could just take people on this journey and show them how the story ends, it was gonna actually compel people. And oh, let me see this. Oh, hold on a second. So it was kind of like all these ideas were working, and then we stumbled upon this starving polar bear. And I know that you hate watching this, but I'm going to make you watch it for 1 minute. Yeah, so at this point, Sea Legacy was only still 3 or 4 people. And we put this online, and we had no idea that it was going to go viral. We were completely unprepared for the backlash that we faced. Our thinking with this was, in 50 years, polar bears might go extinct because the ice is melting in the Arctic. And you can show the numbers to people all day long, and that will never create the emotional reaction than showing, what an actual starving polar bear looks like. The reality, the truth, the journalistic truth of this story is that we don't know why this polar bear was dying. I have no idea if it was shot, if it was sick, if it had a virus. I don't know. What I do know is that it was starving to death. And that's what it looks like when an animal loses its habitat and its food source. A lot of people commented on this photo and these videos. It went around the world. 2 billion people saw it. It was published in over 200 magazines and newspapers. A lot of people were very supportive, very grateful that we had published this. A lot of people had questions. They wanted to know if why we didn't save it, why we didn't feed it, or if we could put styrofoam in the Arctic to protect polar bears. But the really surprising thing is how many people were pissed off. They were so angry. And after thinking about it for a while, I realized that you cannot confront people with a story this dramatic without giving them an opportunity to take an action. And that's when the next iteration of Sea Legacy was born. I'm going to talk about these wedges in just a second. But before I do that, I want to tell you this little story. So one day we're in our home in Vancouver Island, and these 2 kids knock on the door, and they're from the UK. And, they introduce themselves, they're product designers, they're technology, they build applications and platforms. And they said to me, we love what you're doing with Sea Legacy. We want to help you. We want to build you this technology platform. And I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought they were building us a website. And I'm like, sure. We'd love a new website. What they were actually building for us was the answer to the starving polar bear video. The technology platform is one that allows people to donate money in several different currencies. It allows us to house our own petitions, and it allows us to gather the data of all the people that are looking at our content. we can see behind the curtain to see where people are coming from, what they're interested in, and we can keep the conversation going with them. When you sign a petition in change.org, you give away your data. The app never shares that information with the people that are actually putting those petitions up. So you have no way of actually building the community that is needed to actually move these issues. The technology tool eventually became what's known as Only One. We wanted it to be a platform that was bigger than Sea Legacy, that Sea Legacy still has an environmental connotation to the name. We wanted it to be more open and really an invitation to anybody who wants to be part of this conversation. And we could see that when you share beautiful photographs and just, these amazing scenes from the ocean, that's the top of the funnel. People who might not even be interested in climate change might see that on social media, and that may be the first point of entry. They might share, or they might like, they might comment, and that takes them a little bit further down the tunnel. Eventually, the goal is that they become donors, and these small dollar donors are so incredibly important. We call this community the Tide. Out of our 15 million followers, about 6,000 people donate on a monthly basis. We started this a couple of years ago. And when we first created the Tide, I had no idea. Today, we raise almost $2 million a year from these small dollar donors. In the beginning, we didn't have enough money to actually pay for the operations of Sea Legacy, so we had to use some of that money. But today, we actually are able to pass 100% of that money directly to other conservation organizations in the front lines. When people ask me, how do we choose the issues that we work in? That's where we come up with these wedges. A couple of years ago, I read a beautiful scientific article that was written by some of my favorite conservation scientists. And the title is what really caught my attention. It's called Rebuilding Marine Life: How to Restore Health and Abundance to the Oceans in a Single Generation. And what the authors had done really is giving us the recipe for how do we get to this beautiful idea of a healthy and abundant oceans by 2050. And it got me thinking, Martin Luther King didn't start his speech by saying, I have a nightmare. He painted the picture of the dream that we need to aspire to. And that's what this paper did for me. And what they're saying is that we have to do these 6 things. There's a 7th that I'll talk about it in a second, but we need to do these 6 things, and we need to do them all at the same time. So we don't get to choose if we just work on plastics or we just work on fisheries. We have to protect more of the ocean. We have to protect species like whales and sharks. We have to stop the flow of pollution into the sea. And that's not just plastic, it's also fossil fuels, fertilizers, antibiotics, even cocaine ends up in the ocean. We have to rethink how we capture food from the ocean. And this goes back to my early experiences as a marine biologist 25 years ago. It feels like we haven't learned anything. There's still industrial fishing fleets out there mining the ocean as if it was a commodity instead of a living resource. The most important one to me is we have to recast the ocean as a solution to climate change. When you go to the beach and you take a gulp of seawater, it's not just water you're drinking. You're drinking a living broth of microorganisms that are exactly what gives our planet the ability to be alive. Half of the oxygen we breathe comes from that broth and from the many ecosystems in the ocean, like seagrass beds and mangroves that build oxygen into our planet. The final wedge is important for me. Number 7 is there has to be ocean justice. The communities that live at the edge of the sea that are already experiencing the effects of climate change, we need to do right by them. We have spent so much time here in the Bahamas trying to document what Dorian did to the Abacos. And the reason we focus on that is because Dorian is not just a problem of the Bahamas. It's a problem for all of us, just like the wildfires in Australia are a global problem. So I often talk about, if extraterrestrials were looking at us from outer space, looking down at our little beautiful planet, they would normally assume that we are an ocean planet and we are ocean creatures, but we are terrestrial and we are very arrogant. So we think we're land creatures, but no, our planet is fully an oceanic planet.
And if our oceans die, there's absolutely no hope for humans to survive. So let me see, I'm just showing you a handful of pictures. Most of these are from this latest expedition in Bahamas. We're extremely lucky that we get to spend so much time underwater. The platform Only One is doing amazing. Our vision for this platform was to solve two issues that the ocean conservation community is facing. Number one is we don't have enough people who care. We need to build a much bigger audience. Sea Legacy has the largest audience of any conservation organization outside of Greenpeace, who's bigger. And so if we could point our followers to the work that all these other organizations are doing to move those 6 wedges, it's a great service. But the second thing we wanted to do is solve the second issue. Of all the sustainable development goals, sustainable development goal number 14, the one that deals with the ocean, is the most underfunded. Shocking, I know. So we need to raise a lot more money for ocean conservation. What's happening today is that all these, imagine this, there's 5,000 ocean conservation organizations just in the US, and they're all struggling for money. They're all struggling for expertise. So our vision for the tide is that that money, those $2 million a year, are going to go directly to frontline conservation efforts. Last month, we donated to the Bahamas National Trust, to the cleanup effort at the Dorian. And I think that if we tell our followers how their small contribution of $5 a month is actually impacting ocean conservation in the front lines, they're going to be compelled to do so much more. And hopefully our dream is to grow the tide to be twice the size that it is now. So 12,000 people by the end of the year. I was just going to show you a few videos, but we do a lot of these little vignettes. Just to show you, I mean, the kinds of communications tools that we do for local audiences. So I really want to leave a lot of time to have a more of a conversation and give opportunity for questions and answers. I just want to wrap up by saying that the dream that Paul and I had of having a boat that could take us around the world, that would be the iconic symbol of hope for the oceans, finally came through during COVID. We found the ideal boat. It was for sale. The owners are rabid environmentalists. They really wanted to help get this boat. It used to be called Elsie, and this boat was built in New Zealand. It's a 62-foot long aluminum catamaran that has already sailed around the world 3 times. We bought it and we outfitted it remotely. The previous owner of the boat did all the work for free. North Sails donated the beautiful new sails, and we took off during COVID in October. Paul and I drove across Canada to Maryland and got on this boat, cut the lines at the dock, and our dream is to take this boat around the world on this mission of a blue legacy. We have been in the Bahamas since October. Thursday, we depart. We're heading south, and we're going to be crossing the Panama Canal in the next few weeks. If you follow us on social media, you know that I was just in Panama with the president making this announcement of a new marine protected area. We were there at their invitation. They wanted us to come and photograph and film. The incredible importance of this new MPA is called the Coiba Ridge Marine Protected Area. Our mission as we cross the Panama Canal is to go to Cocos Island in Costa Rica, to go to the Galapagos, and to work with governments to create a network of MPAs that keeps the fishing fleet out, and that allows animals to have a swimway where they're protected so that they can migrate freely. Sea Legacy is not just Paul and I. Today, there's 30 employees in our organization. I'm the president of the organization, but I actually have a CEO that does all the important work of running the board. We have a giving board of directors that raises most of the money the organization needs to survive. And Sean Heinrichs is our co-founder. And we have other storytellers, people like Andy Mann and John Weller. And we want to tell stories from all around the world. So I honestly subscribe to the idea that with photography, we can change how the story ends. I am very glad that you're all photographers and that you're going to help us tell the story. So should we take some questions, Amanda?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was awesome. We actually had a question come in from Glenn. Glenn, do you want me to read it or do you want to say it out loud?
Go ahead and read it, Amanda. You have a better voice.
Oh, come on, Glenn. Come on.
Okay. So and there's some members that are here today that have traveled for their university along with students and faculty. Although a lot of times that's a struggle to get them to send a photographer. Do you have any strategies on how to advocate to be like, hey, I need to be there to document this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this has been the struggle of so many organizations. And I think if you can point to success stories like Sea Legacy and how we're able to generate so much funding, dangle the carrot of funding in front of them. Nobody gives any funding to stories that are not passionate and beautiful. And it's in a world that is so noisy, you know, where we have to compete with so much stuff on the internet, you really need a professional photographer to be able to stop the noise for just a second and capture people's attention. I'll write a letter, Glenn. You just let me know what you need. I'll tell them what's what. I mean, if we can get some metrics around engagement and around, you know, whatever the metric of success is before and after, just ask them to allow you to experiment, you know, and we can prove to them.
Awesome. Excellent.
It really works, you know. Oh, I don't need to tell you, you know that.
I see Sydney has her hand raised there.
I do. Hi, Cristina. I'm Sydney. I'm in Boston. Give you a little sense of where we are. Thank you so much for sharing.
The sea, that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Your work is completely amazing and inspiring. I was wondering, how do you, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Well, how do you cope with the negative, hard parts of what you do? That's really, really heavy. So is there enough positives to counter the negatives, or is there just a lot of wine or chocolate or ice cream?
I think all of the above, Sydney, but more than anything is, you know, I don't know where it comes from. You know, I actually had the opportunity to ask Jane Goodall once, where these personal responsibility, the sense of like, it's, we have to fix this, you know, there's no choice. Where does it come from? Why do some of us have it and believe so firmly that something must be done and other people don't care? And she didn't have an answer, but the negative is definitely true. It's out there, it's overwhelming. And I think it takes us to this place of apathy and desperation. I deal with it because I'm a mom and I have young children. Well, they're not that young anymore, they're young adults. And I really feel that I should do everything I can so that, number one, they see me working towards a solution. And number two, I mean, it'd be awesome if we could really restore health to our planet. I like to lead with that narrative, Cindy, because I think if we, like Martin Luther King, it's not going to be overnight that we achieve civil rights or equality or deal with climate change, but we have to start somewhere. And leaning on the positive and the hopeful is a much better way than, you know, letting our apathy take the best of us. So
I think that's a major reason why a lot of people seem like they don't care. It's so massive. And if you care, it just swallows you and you feel completely helpless, which is actually why your organization is really great, because it sounds like people can step in and participate and be part of the solution, which is amazing because it's you're sharing your incredible work and then it's also doing good with it as well, which is really wonderful.
yeah, you know, so first of all, we open only one to any organization that wants to host a petition with us or tell a story with us. And then the idea is exactly that. If you donated $5, and we've actually done focus groups, we've asked our small dollar donors if they want to have more input into how we spend the money, and they don't care. They trust us that we're going to spend it on the right things.
Yeah.
So sprinkling around and saying, this week we are supporting a cleanup on a beach. Next week, we're supporting a new marine protected area. We're supporting a group of moms that are whatever it is. If you show people the impact of their investment, especially when we win big ones, this Keystone Pipeline that just got canceled. I mean, it takes a long time, but you have to beat the drum. And I think it takes a lot of public pressure. It takes a lot of public awareness, and it's repetition. Don't give up, Sydney. There's hope.
Any
Who
other
else has
questions?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you. You've been incredibly inspiring to me. My name is Kristen. I'm a photographer at a natural history museum that's on the campus of the University of Florida. And your work is admiring, but your relentlessness is admiring. I'm also a mom, and I have a 12 and an 8-year-old, and it's really hard. Like, I'm very passionate about nature and conservation, and I'm constantly thinking, like, I need to think smaller. Like, what can I do that's just right outside my back door? And I just read on your blog your like reflection on what you would tell yourself, 20 years later. It was amazing, and I'm really inspired by you, and it's giving me hope that I don't have to give up on some of my dreams just because I'm a mom. So thank you.
Here's a thought I'll share with you, Kristen. Somebody said to me this a while ago. He said, when you're singing in a choir, every once in a while you have to stop and catch your breath. That doesn't mean that the song, ended. People around you are still singing. So give yourself a break and then just come back to the song. We're doing this together. My dream really is to build a global movement of people who care enough to take an action. So, become a Tide member, have your children give $3 a month, and then have them come back and see how their money is impacting in a positive way. I think if more people care, if more people are willing to do just anything.
So, Cristina, I enjoyed going through and looking at all your photos, just blown away by them. And the diversity is pretty incredible, from underwater to people, places. I'm curious, what do you enjoy the most? What brings you the most joy?
I'm gonna share with you my latest thing. And I'm 55 years old. What we do as photographers is very physical. It's not an easy thing to carry all this gear around. I know that I probably have another 10, 15 years of really valuable work in me. And I see how it's coming together, this passion for indigenous communities and local empowerment with the underwater work. I now see that what I need to do is to photograph the story of where the ocean meets the land and the people, and I need to do it from the perspective of the ocean. So I've started doing that. You'll see some of my photographs of the boy with the stingray, the girl with the hammerhead shark. I'm trying to look for more of that ocean human narrative. I don't think a lot of photographers are doing that, so I'm finding a niche.
I think Mark had his hand up. Did you have your hand up, Mark?
Mark is very serious
Yes.
about his Nikon equipment.
Love my Nikons. Yeah, thanks, Cristina. I really appreciate you coming today. I just looking through all your images. One thing that I'm noticing is the wildlife that you photograph. None of them seem to be intimidated by your presence. I was just wondering, how do you act or react when you get into those situations to where you seem non-threatening to the wildlife?
Mark, it's a great question. I think I've made peace with the headline that says "Photographer eaten by shark." I don't know. I always feel like I'm in a movie, and I always feel so lucky that animals are willing to allow me into their world. so I have come to learn, that if you chase animals around, they run, they flee, and they are very fast, much faster than you are. So the best thing you can do is just to be still. And that means that, you're a competent water person that is not kicking around and flailing around, but you're also calm in the way that you approach the situation. And I mean, for those of you who do wildlife, or even the ones that photograph people, you know that when you're calm, it radiates from you. So yeah, something that helps, Mark. We do a lot of the work that we do snorkeling and free diving. And when I started learning how to free dive, they teach you these breathing technique, where you hold your breath for 8 and exhale for 4. And it just creates this meditative state. And your brain calms down, because your brain is the organ in your body that consumes most oxygen. So calming your brain in order to hold your breath is really important. And it just puts you in this calm state. Now I use this technique when I'm going to speak in public. I just do a little breathing, and then I feel very mellow.
That's a good tip. It looks like David has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well, David. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say hello and thank you for the presentation. I've been looking through your images while you've been speaking, and you have an incredible body of work. I just love it. Very inspiring, beautiful things.
Thank you very much, David.
I'm in Central Alabama, and I haven't been able to travel like this, but we have a lot of conservation challenges here in our rivers and wetlands as well, and it's so I spend a lot of time in the outdoors. So yeah, I enjoyed seeing your work. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the triggers that got the whole idea of conservation photography to kind of galvanize in me was a trip I did to Tasmania. And I was not as a photographer. I was just taking my kids on a vacation. And I found the work of Peter Drombowskis. I don't know if you have a chance to Google him. He's passed away, but he used to have one of those field cameras, the enormous ones, and he used to carry it around. He was known because he never took a photograph less than 2 days from the road. And he would take his camera to these beautiful places in the highlands of Tasmania and photograph up there, the watershed of the Franklin and the Gordon River. When the government of Australia decided to dam those rivers to generate electricity for Australia, Dombrovskis was like a really shy guy, and he didn't want to speak up. He didn't want to be the one protesting, but he used his beautiful photographs to, really galvanize a movement, a local support against these horrible dams. And guess what? He won. I mean, that was the first time that I saw a photographer let the work do the speaking. So use your images, David, put them in the newspaper, speak about them to the media, because people need to know what's at stake.
Looks like Ken has a question.
Sure. Cristina, thank you for this. The presentation was wonderful. I'm going to lower my hand here. And I really enjoyed looking at your work. I'm thinking about your organization, both of your organizations, and about how you are leveraging social media and technology in a way that, like, when you and I first were about the same age, we got into the business about the same time, and I think we learned the same way, right? Look at other photographers and try to figure out how they did that and how can I do that. Can you talk a little bit about how the technology, does that drive your approach to this, or does your approach sort of, do you choose the technology that you're using for the social media and for all the amazing video and photography work that you do with an eye towards making your followers, basically, how does that, I'm trying to figure out, there's a question in here somewhere, I'm trying to find it, I'm sorry. I feel like 20 years ago we couldn't have done this, right? You couldn't have $3 a month small donors.
10 years ago,
followers, right?
Even 5 years ago would have been a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this, for those of us who have been in this business for a long time, one of the hardest things was, and to your point, Glenn, to demonstrate the value of what we do, the metrics, right? I mean, you put out a brochure, you create a poster or a film, it's impossible to figure out how many people saw it, how many people changed their mind because of it. Because we're using this technology tool, and I am so grateful to these British kids, they were nomadic, they were like moving all around the country. we are able to experiment a lot with the way we tell stories. We do a lot of A/B testing, and I can show you a dying polar bear or a living one, and I can tell you exactly the metrics of how many people saw it, how many people opened, read, how long they spent, all of that. So we are able to throw spaghetti on the wall, experiment with a lot of it, and demonstrate what happens. So when we get petitions out, which ones work, which ones don't work, and we're experimenting with it all the time. We have in our board of directors some of the founders of Uber and Zoom, people that are really interested in how technology and people move together. We couldn't have done this, just 5 years ago. It's moving so fast.
Looks like Ben has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Cristina. Thanks so much for speaking with us. I'm here in Houston, Texas, so we're really close to the Gulf Coast. So something that you just mentioned, because I've been trying to figure out how to ask this, but I love the example of you showing metrics to, like the dying polar bear versus a living one. And something I've really liked about a lot of the images that you guys put out is that it is kind of a very positive and quiet form of advocacy, but it is balanced also with things that are very heart-wrenching. How do you approach that kind of delicate balance?
That is a wonderful question, Ben. Thanks for that. I watched a TED talk, and her last name is Lopez, I think. I forget her first name. And she talked about this. She explained the cadence of storytelling and finding that balance. So let's go back to the Martin Luther King example. He started the speech by talking to us about the dream, but then he reminded us that we still are in a lot of, pain and all the incredibly important, hard, uncomfortable work ahead of us to reach equality. And then he talked about where we could get if we actually work hard. I feel the same way about this. We tell people where we're going, the ideal state, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Because I find that the narratives that are for, a positive outcome as opposed to against, like Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd is very confrontational and very conflict oriented, only work for so long. But galvanizing a movement of people around a common vision is so important. So if you're interested in this type of theory, there's a guy, his name is Peter Senge, and he leads something called the Academy of Systems Change. And he talks about how you use this vision of where we're going to galvanize movement behind it. And part of it, Ben, is to be willing to sit in the uncomfortable place that's the conflict around the work that we're doing. Talking to people who don't agree or people that have special interests.
So I have a question, Cristina. What is it like to live on a boat?
Paul was just saying to me, because I'm going to show you what I'm wearing. I'm going to a gallery opening. I'm all fancy. The ability to be comfortable where I am, Amanda, is so important. Somebody taught me this a long time ago. He said, just be present in whatever you're doing so that you can enjoy it. And that's how I feel. When I'm on Sea Legacy 1, I am the cook that's cooking for the crew. And I know that having a good meal keeps the morale high because it's a lot of hard work. But I love being out at sea. I love that every morning we have a different view. And I have this whole little series on my phone of the scenes that I see outside of the bathroom window, because it might be a lightning storm, but it also might be whales or sharks or villages, right? And I think, Amanda, we live in the most beautiful planet. And I'm so lucky that I get to be out there. Stressful? Yes, I have another Zoom call in 5 minutes, and sometimes we have Wi-Fi, but we don't. I think the stress is going to come now when COVID is, releasing its grip on humanity, and I'm going to have to start traveling again because I've actually enjoyed being not, in airports.
Thank you. That was good. Does
Yeah.
anyone else have any other questions?
I got one more question if I can jump in, Amanda. It's Jeff.
Sure.
Jeff.
How long is, I'm Jeff. I work at the University of Florida, also at a natural history museum like Kristen, where we're photographers at the same place. A question is, what's the longest you've been at sea? then, if you've lived on a boat, you know, like how long have you gone without contacting or coming to port or anything like that? So,
I think the longest was an expedition we did to Antarctica with National Geographic. That was a month long, and that was amazing. You know how awesome it is, Jeff, to not have to answer emails, to have the perfect excuse. I think, you know, to be photographers, somehow we have this ability to be comfortable in our own company. And, you know, I am very extroverted, but there's a huge part of me that's very introverted, and I just love being with myself. I think photographers do that, you know, we just like to be in our own head.
so basically it wasn't a bad thing being there by yourself or with your small crew for a month, that you enjoyed it very much.
No, you know, I was the only woman in the expedition, and I really valued the fact that the director of the expedition, you know, didn't treat me any differently than any of the male photographers, and gave me the assignment of being the split photography. My computer's doing something, sorry. Yeah, to do the split photography in Antarctica. It was amazing. I had to pinch myself. I get to do this and they pay me.
Do you have time for one more question?
Of course, yeah.
Nick?
Yeah, I'm Nick Romanenko from Rutgers University in New Jersey here. I have a kind of a boring technical question, but again, about the split photography. What kind of rig do you do, and how do you get those really looks like decisive moments of stuff, you know, on both sides, so to speak?
You know, Nick, like I said before, I study the work of other photographers, and it was David Duboulet who taught me how to do this. You use a 12-inch dome, and the optics really matter because the light travels differently above and below. So you need to light the bottom part with strobes, and it's a lot of guesswork. Most importantly is you need to have like an f-stop around f16, because you want whatever's on top to be sharp. And so that means that you have to crank the ISO. So I shoot Sony, which allows me to do that. But I mean, it's a lot of experimentation, 99% failure. So you just hope, but I have that voyeuristic thing, you know, where I look at the surface and I am very curious to see what's beneath the surface of the water. And I think a lot of people have the same too. So I look for those photographs just because they satisfy a very, you know, curious aspect of
humanity. The things that are underwater look like they're really close to you. I mean, you're like, how do you stalk and be in that position to be able to do that when they come around, I guess?
I look for those moments, you know, like the jellyfish is a good one. I actually saw it from the dinghy, and it was being carried by the current at just like the perfect speed. And I just dropped in, and I was able to float along with it because the current was taking us both at the same speed. And so then the tentacles were not kind of flopping around. They're all behind it. The current is just, you know, flowing. So I'm just looking for those moments all the time.
So when you say you have strobes, are you like strapped up with strobes? I mean, how does that work?
So you have an underwater housing and the camera sits inside. I use Nauticam because the ergonomics are very similar to how the camera itself works. So the housing and the camera are seamless. Then you have the big dome in the front, and the strobes are attached with, you know, you have to be careful how you position the strobes. They move around. So you have a lot of leeway onto how you point the light. The key is that the strobes need to be hardwired to the camera. And so fiber optics will not do it. You need to have an adapter that goes into the housing and then to the camera. And that allows me to do things like shoot rear sync and to control the strobes manually. And it's a lot of experimentation, you know, half a stop left, half a stop left. I mean, just keep moving the amount of light that you're strobing.
Thank you. That's pretty amazing. You must go wow when you see the results, when everything falls into place.
Oh my God, I'm so relieved. But because imagine this, that when you are shooting light in the water, you're lighting all the backscatter, all the stuff that's suspended in the water is the first thing that gets lit. So every once in a while it comes together. I'm getting good at it.
Thank you. You are.
I really love it. Guys, I'm gonna go to the opening of my gallery. I'm so excited. This gentleman here in the Bahamas saw what we were doing with Sea Legacy, and he offered to do a gallery sale of our work to raise money for Sea Legacy. And guess what? We've already sold most of the art. So hopefully we're gonna raise some money. It's very exciting. Gonna go have a glass of wine.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you guys for all you do. I always like to end by saying, you know, what I do is not extraordinary. One day I just decided that I was going to wear a superhero suit and not ask for permission to do it. And I encourage you to do the same. You know, just declare yourselves for planet Earth and speak as loudly as you can, because we need it.
Thank you, Cristina.